Hi, this is Andrew Kness, and I just wanted to take a brief moment to walk through the new app that was developed by Joe Ballinger and I, looking at the Pesticide Data Explorer. So basically, it takes data from the USGS database on pesticide use in a variety of crops in the United States, and we have added in some toxicity information and then created this little web portal to allow people to kind of look through the data on their own. So I just kind of want to walk through a few of the options that you can use this app for. So first of all, the most obvious one is just looking at the time frame at which you want to zero in on. We're going to leave that just at the full range of data from 1992 to 2017, which is the data that is included within the USGS data. You can select whichever crop you're wanting to look at. Right now, only insecticides are included in this web app, and so the most interesting insecticide data happens to be in cotton and corn, and so that's what we're going to focus on today. As far as the outputs, you can look at the total weight of the pesticides that have been applied over time. We've standardized that based on the cropping area for those products as well. So you can look at it either in the total kilograms applied or the kilograms per hectare of that particular crop. So we've standardized the cotton data by cotton acres, corn data by corn acres, etc. But we've also included the toxicity, and that's using a risk quotient approach. And so basically, when we look at the toxicity data, we're looking at the number of LD50s, or the toxic units for acute toxicity, per hectare, or the reference dose, which is the chronic toxicity toxic unit per hectare also. You can also then display all of the products by active ingredient, site of action by the insecticide resistance group, or the chemical family. So we're just going to go ahead and play around with this data. So I'm just going to leave the defaults to start. So we're going to look at cotton and the weight applied by active ingredient. And so we'll just click Create Plot. And what it will do is it'll take all of the information that you've entered in, and it will create a fancy little plot like that. So I'm going to, very first off, I'm going to actually increase the size of my plot, and you have the ability to do that by adjusting the plot size down at the bottom. So we're going to do an 800 by 1200 pixel plot. So once I've got those changed, I click Create Plot again, and that will update it so a little bit bigger size so that we can more easily see. Okay, so this is basically how all of the plots are going to be displayed. So again, the time down at the bottom, here we've got the total U.S. pesticide use in just kilograms that were applied to cotton over this time frame. And then it's going to display each AI separately, but as a stacked area chart. And so basically, if you look at the very top of this area, that's the total amount of pesticides that have been applied. So again, if we want to standardize that by kilograms per hectare and click Create Plot, then it will adjust that for the cotton acreage in each particular year, because cotton acreage has changed over time. And so I think the weight applied actually gives us a little bit better idea of what's going on within any crop use. And so basically it takes the top 11 AIs and then bulks the rest into this other category. And that's just because finding a palette of more than 12 colors that you can actually see and differentiate is close to impossible. And so right now the Pesticide Data Explorer will give you the top 11 AIs or sites of action or chemical families, and then it will bulk everything else into other, which other, in most cases, when you're talking some of the other variables, tends to be a pretty small proportion of the total. Now, when we're talking the weight applied, the other can actually be fairly substantial, as it is in this case. You can see the other is a pretty high proportion, but so that kind of gives you an idea of what the data does. Now, you'll notice that the tooltips that show up when I hover over here, it will actually tell you the amount for whichever one you're hovering near the top of. So you can see that parathion, which is this gray area at the top, in 1992, the average was 0.37 kilograms per hectare. And so you can actually hover over any one of these and it will give you the value for that one. So dicrotophos in 1996 was 0.033 kilograms per hectare. If we look at it closer down toward the end in 2013, that had actually increased to 0.142 kilograms per hectare on average in cotton. Okay, so the other nice thing that we can do is if you're not 100% sure, because some of these colors are still a little bit difficult to differentiate, one of the things you can do is actually click on the legend to have that particular product disappear. So if we were having, if we're, if the colors are not good, like we do have these two purples, which can be kind of hard to tell which is which. And granted, if you're hovering, you can actually see, but in some cases that hovering doesn't work quite so well if they're really thin bars. So one of the things you can actually do is click on the product in the legend, and it will actually remove that then from the plot, and you can just see through that hole in the plot. And so if you want to double check to make sure that what you're looking at is 4-8 or chlorpyrifos, you can actually just click on that to see which one disappears as a way to kind of visually distinguish which product is which one. So aldecarb, acephate, and so on. So you can also, these are placed in order from the largest of the AIs on the bottom of the chart to the least averaged over the entire period. And so if you want to look at this without the other, doing that doesn't actually help you scale this very well. But what you can do is over in the choose pesticides to include, you can actually deselect whichever ones you want to exclude. So if you take the other check mark out of it and then recreate the plot, it will actually rescale things, leaving that other off. So it'll take that off the bottom and then restack everything. So that way you can see more easily what would the impact be if you, say, removed any particular product from this. So if, for example, you wanted to see what this plot looked like without aldecarb and chlorpyrifos, you can deselect those and click create plot, and you can see what the application rate per hectare would be if you remove those two compounds. You can also do the opposite by deselecting all and then only look at chlorpyrifos, so you can see what chlorpyrifos does, what the trends have been with that particular pesticide over that same period. Now, another feature that we've built into this is to include the annual total. So what this basically does is creates a line at the top of the total. And it's mostly useful for situations like this where you want to see what some subset of the pesticides contribute to the total amount of the weight applied. And so if we check that box and then recreate the plot, what you'll see is that this looks at what the average of all products are in kilograms per hectare. And then you can see how that one particular product stacks up in terms of its contribution to that. So again, if we wanted to go then to chemical family and create the plot, there again, now we're organized by organophosphates, carbamates. You can see which of those. And so if you wanted to see what the impact of removing the organophosphates from that and see what it would do to the trends, we can actually deselect the organophosphates from the total, recreate the plot, and you can see of the organophosphates, this is the amount that it would remove. You can do that for a few. You can also do that by site of action group. So you can remove the 1As and 1Bs and see what the impact overall of that particular change would be. Okay, so again, one of the primary purposes of this is not just to look at weight applied, because that data is fairly easy to come by. The real contribution, we think, is looking at the acute or the chronic toxicity. So we've actually taken, again, a risk quotient approach. So what this will do is show the number of reference doses, or the chronic toxic unit, applied per hectare. So let's change crops just for fun. We'll look at corn, and the chronic toxicity displayed again by active ingredient. And we'll uncheck that. We'll click create plot. And then this is what that looks like. So if we were, instead of to look at the kilograms applied, if we wanted to look at the amount of chronic toxicity applied on a per hectare basis in corn this time, we can see that turbofos is actually probably one of the major components of the total pesticide toxicity load in terms of chronic toxicity, followed by chlorpyrifos. Now we have seen a pretty good reduction over time. And now we can also sort these, again, instead of looking at specific AIs, we can do this by chemical family. Click Create Plot. And then we can see that the organophosphates really are the primary contributor to the toxic units applied to corn. Now, there's a few things we can do with that. One, if you want to see kind of what other products are going on here, one, you can deselect the organophosphates over on the left side. Click Create Plot, and you can see what the trends would be like without that. Again, you can include the annual total if you want to see the line and where that blank is. But the other thing that we can do, and we'll recreate that here, the other thing we can do is we can actually just zoom in by drawing a square with our mouse cursor around some part of this figure. So if we want to zoom in on this area between 2010 to 2012, one thing we can do is actually just draw a box around that chunk of the plot, and it will zoom in on that part of the plot. So we can zoom in again, and we can get to the point where we can actually now see what those particular products are. So again, we can see what the phenylpyrazole, carbamates, and see what their contribution is. And if you double click, then it will remove those. So if you want to actually have the tooltips show up, you have to be careful. Oops, sorry about that. You have to be careful when you're doing the zoom that you actually get a point. And so you want to make sure you're at one of those bins, and then you can use the tooltips again. So again, in terms of the mammalian chronic toxicity, the reference doses per hectare, the organophosphates are contributing a little over 12,000 RFDs per hectare compared to the carbamates of about 4 RFDs per hectare. So that's more or less what the Pesticide Data Explorer can do. We encourage you to play around with it, look and see at the different pesticide trends. You can again look at acute toxicity, total amount applied, or standardized by acreage. And you can also sort by site of action or look directly at the active ingredients. So happy exploring, and please feel free to contact Joe Ballinger or I if you have any questions about it.